On Sunday, the New York Times published a big fancy article about the future of superhero franchises in Hollywood with a strong focus on DC. They had this nice new picture of Walter Hamada for us to use. Oh boy! And you gotta admit, at the very least, Walter Hamada is a snappy dresser. In the article, Walter Hamada doubled down on the multiverse business model, even though Marvel is going to beat them to it yet again. But according to Hamada, apparently Earth 1 is where Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman lives, while Earth 2 is where Robert Pattinson's Batman lives. And the Flashpoint movie that's coming up will explain that to general audiences, which means Pattinson cameo, maybe? But on which Earth does Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam live? Dwayne Johnson's a pretty savvy guy. I'm sure he's like, put me on Earth 2. I mean, after another divisive DC movie, will everyone be like, my character lives on Earth 2, right? That's the successful Earth. And then also, what about Joaquin Phoenix's Joker? Does he get an Earth 2? Or, you know, they've been saying they might make a Joker 2, although nobody's talking about it right now. I mean, in the comic books, there's just an infinite number of Earths. And so you would like that to be fun, creative stories, not mistakes. Just create a new Earth every time we mess up. That would be bad. Plus, the MCU is having fun with the multiverse from a creative perspective, whereas it seems the DCEU is using it from a business perspective to have competing versions of the same character, and that really undercuts all the characters. Like, for instance, can Robert Pattinson's Batman, does this mean he can have his own Wonder Woman and Superman? How about his own Harley Quinn? And what if those versions of the character proved to be more popular than Gal Gadot, Henry Cavill, and Margot Robbie? Why fracture your fan base like that instead of getting them all behind a single version of the character? And why do that to your talent? That seems very mean. Remember how upset Jared Leto was when Joaquin Phoenix signed on to play the Joker? I mean, how many people does Warner Brothers want to make upset? You know, they already did a bunch with their HBO Max announcement. It just seems crazy to me. You would think that when you sign on to play a character, you'd have the studio fully behind you, not hedging its bets with a couple of actors. Some of you have suggested that after Wonder Woman 1984's misstep, perhaps it's time for the DCEU just to reboot with the Batman, right? Like someone pointed out to me they felt that the success of the first Wonder Woman was really the only thing keeping the DCEU moving forward. I don't think that's totally true because Aquaman was very successful. So I think it's those two movies, which is interesting. But I don't think you have to totally get rid of the DCEU. You could have that live on an HBO Max spinning out of the Snyder Cut. Now, the New York Times article called the Snyder Cut a cul-de-sac, and then really twisted the knife by saying, in case you didn't get it, that was a street that leads to nowhere. Instead of, it's an ideal place to put your home because there's no through traffic. It's a nice private area where you get to just have fun and no one bothers you. That's what I think of when I hear a cul-de-sac, and so I think that the negative spin on it was totally unnecessary. I think a number of fans would be thrilled, and so would HBO Max, to have the current DCEU live on in the Snyderverse via the streaming service. The DCEU is embracing the multiverse, but to me, DC has always shined with Elseworlds stories. The Snyderverse could be an ongoing Elseworlds story, with the DC movies rebooting with the Batman. In Flashpoint, the whole point of Flashpoint as a story is that it creates a reboot. Just ask the recent DC animation division, which used Flashpoint to reboot. I've heard that Warner Brothers will have the entire Justice League show up in Flashpoint, although as of now, everyone but Cyborg. Let's see if that changes. But their roles will either be cameos or full-on supporting roles, depending on what talent agrees to. Ben Affleck has said he signed on to Flashpoint to do a proper goodbye to Batman, so maybe that should be the case for everyone. But again, Aquaman made $1 billion, so how can you say goodbye to that? And Aquaman 2 is about to begin filming. But then, of course, there's also the Amber Heard problem over there. It's really difficult. And you know what? There's no reason to discuss it because Warner Brothers is not going to reboot the DCEU because, quite frankly, there's just too much already in motion. We'll talk about whether or not they should pause and organize at the end of this video. But there are too many projects moving ahead, and I think that some of them could be quite successful. So Warner Brothers just isn't willing to pull the plug on them for the sake. They're not willing to sacrifice a few hits for maybe what could be the greater good. But since it's not, some of these films I think will be very successful. Some of these projects will be very successful. So that's that's a given instead of, the maybe that they could maybe fix this whole thing. It's a tough call. I can understand, but it's not working out so far. It's not correcting itself. But let's break down all the upcoming projects. And again, as I said, I think some of these could be incredibly popular. So let's start with the DC Trinity. There's Matt Reeves' The Batman, now set for March 4th, 2022. That movie looks phenomenal, although that date is a disaster. They should really move it. Warner Brothers insists that Patty Jenkins will conclude her Wonder Woman trilogy with Wonder Woman 3, emphasis on conclude, but she's coming back for one more, they say. But then an Amazon spin-off movie, not a television show as was originally reported, and I'm hearing from my sources it's a movie as well, that will likely come first. Then remember how Warner Brothers gave J.J. Abrams $250 million to make Warner Brothers his new home, with the hopes that he would not only save DC films, but take over Superman specifically? Well, it's happening. Abrams has a Justice League Dark HBO Max show in development, and he's written an outline for a new Superman movie to direct, and he's meeting with screenwriters to use his outline and create a script. He's still not sure if he's going to continue with Henry Cavill or not. Maybe he wants to see how the Batman does. I think the reaction to Wonder Woman 1984 probably is not helping, but the decision hasn't been made yet. Speaking of DC on HBO Max, Walter Hamada clarified to the New York Times that Warner Brothers will release 4 DC movies a year theatrically, but also hopes to release 2 riskier films a year on HBO Max. My God, Walter, how much riskier could DC films get? Now, Hamada says that the risky films he has in mind right now are a Batgirl movie. I told you they're contemplating going the Batgirl, turning her into Batgirl Beyond, taking the Batman Beyond story, with Michael Keaton's older Bruce Wayne brought over via Flashpoint as her mentor. Why do that? If you're gonna, I think Michael Keaton as the older Bruce Wayne is great, but why not just do the Terry McGinnis thing? I think you're just asking for a problem. Then also, Static Shock, they listed as a risky film for HBO Max. Michael B. Jordan is co-producing. I think the riskiest thing here would be downgrading the iconic flagship milestone character to a streaming movie. Walter Hamada also said that with every new DC movie, Warner Media is now asking themselves if the movie has an HBO Max spin-off. The Batman is getting a GCPD show. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad is spinning off Peacemaker. And then, of course, Green Lantern will return to the DC movieverse, not as a movie this time, but will start out as an HBO Max show, with Jeff Johns involved. What? He's still around. To be fair, he is the most famous for his Green Lantern work. He's involved in the Doom Patrol show, which we all think is wonderful, and Stargirl. I don't think any of us are watching it because it's just off on its own somewhere, but it's a good show, so maybe that'll work out. As for other theatrical releases, the Flashpoint movie, Aquaman 2, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and Black Adam are all dated. And those are all the projects that will likely actually happen. Sure, there are a slew of DC projects in development, but they don't seem to be at all a priority to Warner Brothers or HBO Max at this point. So that's the near future of the DCEU. What do you think of this multiverse approach? Which projects are you the most excited about, and which would you maybe not move forward with? The MCU has always been very well organized, and Star Wars was finally forced to take a break and get organized too, by, as I reported to you months ago, copying the structure of the MCU. As painful and as difficult as it might be, I feel it would be worth it in the long run for the DCEU to stop, like Star Wars has, and get organized. But it would be painful to do, and it's tough. What would you advise Warner Brothers to do? Or is it simply too late to pause this franchise? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.